Sato and Akane have been at each other's throats for as long as they've known each other. And on this particular day, Akane is yelling at him for some reason. But Sato couldn't care less and tells her to leave him alone. But that just leads to an even bigger argument. One of Akane's friends, Hinamori, comes over and she finds it funny how they are always fighting. But now that she thinks about it, Akane seems to care way too much about what Sato does. So she's starting to wonder if there's something going on between the two of them. Akane is disgusted and denies having any feelings for Sato because she'd much rather have a roach crawl into your ear and go out with him. And Sato is equally offended by the idea of dating someone like her, so they start arguing some more. Once the school day is over, Sato is on his way back home, but all of a sudden, he gets a phone call from his grandpa. He answers and his grandpa invites him to come have some tea with him at his house. But Sato has better things to do, so he's not interested in going on a tea date with his grandpa. Grandpa reminds him that he already made Sato the heir to his company, so the least he could do is spend some time with his dear old Pop while he's still alive. But even if Sato still doesn't want to, Grandpa knows a thing or two about kidnapping children, so he has a limo and some of his armed guards pull up beside Sato. Sato briefly considers running out of there like a track star, but then he realizes his grandpa is definitely crazy enough to have him shot and sent to the hospital, so he decides to comply. He gets in the limo, and while the guards are driving him, he asks where he is being taken. The guards are apologetic because they know their boss is being unreasonable, so he tells him that they were instructed to bring Sato to a villa, but they don't know what Sato's grandpa is planning. Sato's grandpa, Tenryu Hojo, once saved the Hojo group from the brink of collapse. And under his leadership, the Hojo group became a global high-tech corporation. So it isn't a stretch to say that he's one of the richest and most powerful people in the world. And it may be hard to believe, but Sato's grandpa cares about his grandson more than anything. But Sato's father, on the other hand, seems to care a lot more about milk. Eventually, they arrive at the house, so Sato sits outside and waits for his grandpa to show up. But while he's waiting, Akane unexpectedly shows up, and the first thing she does is yell at him. She asks Sato what he's doing here, so he explains that his grandpa asked him to come. And as it turns out, Akane's grandma invited her here for tea as well. The situation is strange, and neither of them knows what's going on, but they still can't stand each other, so they end up bickering as usual. Just then, Sato's grandpa and Akane's grandma show up, and they've got something important to tell the two kids, so everyone heads inside. A feast has been prepared because the two grandparents want to celebrate, but Sato has no idea what they are supposedly celebrating here. He also notices that Akane hasn't touched her food at all, so he asks if she's alright. But his concern is met with a roast because Akane says his ugly face made her lose her appetite. The two start arguing again, and both grandparents find it very amusing since it reminds them of how they used to act when they were back in high school. Sato is getting sick of this, so he asks them what they want to talk about, and the two respond saying that Sato and Akane are going to get married. Sato and Akane are in disbelief and think they must have misheard their grandparents because there's no way they just told the two of them to get married, especially since they are still in high school. But their grandparents are dead serious about it. Tenryu and Chiyo have known each other since they were kids and were even in love back then, but due to some petty arguments, they ended up drifting apart. Tenryu and Chiyo both ended up marrying other people, but after a lifetime apart, both of their partners are 6 feet under, so the two decided to reconnect. The point is, even though they are happy with their lives now, they can't help but wonder what could have been had they stayed together as a couple when they were kids, and what better way to relive their youth than to drive their grandkids into it and force the two of them to get married. Akane objects to the marriage because marriage is something that's supposed to be done out of love, not because two old people want to watch their grandkids getting frisky. Plus, Sato points out that it's literally illegal to force kids into marriage, and there's nothing Tenryu or Chiyo can do to make them agree to the marriage. Tenryu had expected that response, which is why he came prepared with some legal blackmail. He signals for the door to be opened and gives Sato an ultimatum. Either he marries Akane or the dog dies. Sato doesn't really care because that's not his dog. But then Tenryu threatens to write Sato out of his will and renounce him as his heir. That's something Sato doesn't care about, so he's starting to think that marrying Akane might not be so bad. But Akane is still strictly opposed because if she's going to get married, and she only wants to do it with someone she loves. Just then, Chiyo calls Akane over, and whatever she said must have been a serious threat because it sends shivers down Akane's spine. Now that all the blackmail has been laid out, Tenryu says he is giving the two of them 3 days to decide whether they'll get married to each other or not. Once their grandparents are gone, Akane asks Sato what they are going to do, but neither of them has made a decision. But he needs to have all the details first, so he asks Akane what threat her grandma made so he knows how bad her situation is. Akane gets defensive and refuses to tell him since it's a private matter. Later that night, Akane is laying in bed and thinking about how she has never managed to outperform Sato. And what pisses her off even more is the fact that he always beats her without even trying. She decides to call Himari to ask for advice on what she should do. And after explaining the situation of being forced to marry someone she doesn't like, hypothetically of course, Himari is surprised that stuff like that still happens. Akane asks what Himari would do if she were in the same situation. So Himari tells her that she would have to refuse since she has someone she already likes, and she would never marry someone else. Akane is surprised to hear that Himari has a crush since she has never mentioned him before, but that's just because Akane never asked. Akane asks for the details, but Himari doesn't want to tell her the guy's name for now since she still hasn't confessed to him yet, although she doesn't admit that it's someone from their class. They talk about Himari's love life enough for one night, so Himari changes the subject and asks Akane if she is in love with anyone. Akane has never had time to fall in love with someone before and right now, and the only emotion Akane is feeling is a burning hatred for a certain someone. Since Akane doesn't have a crush or anything, Himari thinks it would be fine if she just got married like her grandparents want. After all, assuming this hypothetical guy isn't a serial killer, they could just live together in split rent and bills, so it would be a great way for Akane to save on living expenses. Although she'd probably need to give birth to an heir at some point, and Akane doesn't think she could handle that. Meanwhile, back at his house, Sato is having a panic attack because he already has a hard enough time dealing with Akane at school. But if they end up married, then he will never be able to escape her constant nagging. Sato's cousin, Shize, can tell that something is bothering him, so she asks him what's wrong and Sato explains that their grandpa is threatening to disown him if he doesn't agree to his demands. That definitely sounds like something their grandpa would do, so Shize asks Sato what he plans to do. She's perfectly fine with him giving up his rights to the company if that's what he wants, because even if he ends up becoming a hobo, she will still love him the same. However, she knows that Sato has big dreams, and if he is going to accomplish those then he will need access to the Hojo Group's resources. Regardless of what he chooses to do, Shize promises that she will be by his side to help him every step of the way and Sato is really glad to have her with him. 3 days go by and both Sato and Akane meet with their grandparents because they have made their decisions and are going to get married. Since that has been settled, Sato says he and Akane will file the paperwork for their marriage once they've graduated. But that's not good enough for their grandparents because they expect Sato and Akane to be in their life as a married couple immediately. They've even got a brand new house lined up for them, so they drop them off there and drive off. Akane starts freaking out because she can't just suddenly start living with Sato. But Sato is already desensitized to the BS his grandpa pulls, so this doesn't surprise him. The two of them head inside, and if nothing else this house is actually pretty nice, so Akane thinks living here might actually be fun. Or it would be if she didn't have to stay here with Sato. This place is fully equipped with everything they could possibly need, but there's just one problem. There's only one bed. They call their grandparents to complain about the bed, but they intentionally set it up that way because they want Sato and Akane to sleep together. Sato realizes that their grandparents must have set up cameras in order to watch them at night, which is most definitely illegal, but he can't figure out where they put them. However, while Sato is worrying about the cameras, Akane is worrying about having to sleep in the same bed as him. For now, they still need to get their stuff unpacked, so Akane is carrying her stuff upstairs, but that box looks pretty heavy, so Sato asks if she needs any help. She's perfectly capable of doing it by herself. If she doesn't want his help, Sato isn't going to force the issue. But after taking a few steps, Akane loses her footing and falls backwards. Thankfully, she wasn't falling with an umbrella, so Sato catches her and she's perfectly safe. But he asks that she be a little more careful because if she ends up getting herself killed, he'd become the prime murder suspect. After everything has been unpacked, Sato finds a meal his grandpa left for him to eat. After warming up the pizza, Sato is about to start eating, but Akane smells the food and she's really hungry, like she's too stubborn to ask for a piece. Sato doesn't want her to starve, so he ends up giving her a slice. A few minutes later, Sato is ready for bed, so he heads into the bedroom and lays down to go to sleep. But then Akane comes in, and he remembers that they have to share the bed. They both agree that they weren't going to do anything, but there's no way Sato can fall asleep like this. To distract himself, he starts a conversation and asks Akane why she agreed to this marriage, but she still doesn't want to give any details about her reasons. This marriage is just a formality, so she's just going to have to put up with it for the sake of her dream, even if it means following their grandparents' weird rules. Sato suddenly realizes that if their grandparents can arbitrarily make up rules whatever they want, then it's only a matter of time before they make a rule about the two of them having kids. That brings us back to the present, where Akane reminds Sato that under no circumstances is he allowed to tell anyone that they are married. No matter what, Sato tells her that he already intends to keep it a secret, but Akane still doesn't trust him because what guy wouldn't want to brag about getting married to her? The next day at school, Sato's cousin, Shize, quickly pieces together that he has given in to Tenryu's demand by marrying Akane. Disapproving of the arrangement, she demands a bribe to keep quiet. Sato, already overwhelmed, reluctantly complies, knowing that the last thing he needs is more chaos. Meanwhile, Akane is horrified by Sato's diet of nothing but instant ramen, protein shakes, and vitamin supplements. Appalled by his lack of nutrition, she insists on cooking a proper meal for him. However, the taste of real food stirs up painful memories his parents neglect, where meals were an afterthought, and the extravagant business dinners hosted by Tenryu. Overwhelmed by emotions he thought he had buried, Sato pushes the plate away, leading to yet another argument. Their fights escalate over the most trivial things: how to cook, how to clean, how to study, even how to game. Every conversation turns into a battle of wills, leaving both exhausted and frustrated. Desperate for a solution to their constant clashes, she confides in her friend Himari, who advises that they need to start respecting and listening to each other. Similarly, Shize tells Sato that compromise is key to survival. Though skeptical, both Sato and Akane decide to give it a shot. Acknowledging that divorce isn't an option, they sit down for an honest discussion, setting ground rules for sharing chores and coexisting under one roof. To their surprise, they manage to go an entire day without fighting, a small victory that feels monumental. That night, as Sato watches Akane laugh over something trivial, he feels his heart race. He refuses to acknowledge it, but deep down, he knows she really is beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, they don't hate each other as much as they thought. One night, Sato is busy reading his favorite book when Akane interrupts him. She tells him she rented a movie that caught her attention. Sato assumes she wants him to move, so he starts to get up, but Akane stops him. Confused, he stares at her, unsure of what she wants. She holds up the movie tape, 24 uncut hours of kitten footage. She says she wants them to watch it together. Sato is baffled and considers this to be utter bullshit, wondering why anyone would want to watch kittens for 24 hours straight. Fortunately, Akane finds the 3-hour version of the movie instead, and Sato quickly suggests they watch that version instead. They begin watching the movie, and while Akane enjoys every second of it, Sato dozes off on the couch, bored out of his mind. When the movie ends, Akane expresses how much she loved it and suggests they watch the full 24-hour version next time. Sato suddenly wakes up from his nap, disoriented and muttering something about an alien planet. Since they watched something Akane likes, she insists it's only fair for Sato to pick the next thing to watch. However, Sato admits he prefers games to movies. Unfortunately, Akane doesn't know how to play games. Determined, Sato holds his controller up and vows to teach her, hoping she might even enjoy gaming as much as he does. 30 minutes later, Akane is having the time of her life, celebrating her victory after defeating a game boss. And Sato watches her with a faint smile, surprised at how much fun he's having with his so-called arch-nemesis. Later that night, as they lie in bed, Sato wakes up and notices Akane isn't covered by the blanket. He adjusts it. To his surprise, Akane is already awake. She thanks him for the fun they had that day. Facing opposite directions in bed, Sato tells her she can pick the next game they buy, and he'll pick the next movie they watch. At school, Akane helps Sato pick up an eraser he dropped. As Sato lifts his head from his desk, he thanks her and Akane blushes lightly in response. Himari walks up to Akane moments later and asks if she and Sato had a fight, not wanting anyone to know she's getting along with Sato. Akane insists they're always fighting. However, Himari senses something is off. Their behavior doesn't match their usual constant bickering. Feeling cornered, Akane rushes out of the classroom and goes home. A few hours later, Sato is in the library searching for a book when Shizue sneaks up behind him. She covers his eyes with her hands and playfully asks him to guess who it is. Knowing Shizue is the only person who would pull such a stunt, Sato correctly guesses it's her. She laughs and removes her hands from his eyes, confirming his guess. Shizue notices Sato holding a book on communication skills, and although she knows that his communication skills are dog water, she still asks him what it's for. Sato explains that he thinks it might help him strengthen his relationship with Akane. During the break, Sato calls out to Akane as she walks down the hall. Akane turns around with an annoyed look, saying she prefers not to talk much at school. Sato asks if she's busy or has plans for later in the day. When he learns she's free, he invites her to go shopping with him after school. Akane realizes this might be a date, but before she can overreact, Sato quickly pulls her into an empty room to avoid being overheard. Inside the room, Akane scolds him for dragging her into such a dark space because she thinks he's trying to get some. But Sato isn't trying to catch a case, so he clarifies that he only did it because she was about to say something about a date. Akane blushes slightly and points out that it's basically a date since guys and girls don't just meet up for no reason. Sato tries to brush it off, saying it's not a date and that he only needs her help to carry groceries. Akane finds this amusing and decides to play along, leading them both to laugh like total goofballs. After school, Akane is startled when Himari greets her excitedly. Himari's shift at work got cancelled and she wants to hang out. However, Akane already has plans with Sato and doesn't know how to tell her. Himari enthusiastically talks about all the fun they could have together, but Akane, with tears in her eyes, admits she already has plans with someone. Himari takes no offense and, curious, asks if it's a new friend. When Akane says it's someone Himari knows, Himari quickly guesses it's Sato and teasingly asks if it's a date. Flustered, Akane speeds off to avoid answering any more questions. Later, Akane and Sato walk through the park, both blushing as they approach the supermarket near their homes. Inside, Sato notices they're out of eggs at home and a pack to place in the cart. Akane stops him, pointing out that he should check the price before just adding things to the cart. A few minutes later, Akane discovers the supermarket is holding a limited time sale and a crowd has already gathered to grab the discounted items. She tries to push her way through the chaos, but quickly gets shoved to the side. Sato attempts to jump in as well, but he's tossed aside even faster than Akane. Left lying on the floor in shame, they both burst into laughter at how terrible they were fighting for the sale. Akane stands up, smiling, and declares that she isn't going to give up. And then after that, the two walk home together. That night, Akane wakes up to find Sato with his finger in front of her face, about to poke her cheek. She sits up and immediately scolds him, accusing him of planning something as gruesome as gouging a hole in her cheek. Sato denies her accusation and decides to admit he's a total simp by explaining that he couldn't resist poking her cheek because she looked so cute while sleeping. Akane blushes at his response and hugs her pillow. She lies back down and tells him he can watch her sleep, but only for a little while, which is still very creepy. The next morning, they both wake up and greet each other with awkward blushes. Later that afternoon, on their way to school, they pass by a stall selling strawberry cream buns. Akane wants one, so Sato goes to buy it for her. He returns with the pastry in hand, but it's too large for her to eat alone. He suggests they split it, and as they share the cream bun, Himari spots them. She's surprised because she's never seen them together outside school, and begins to suspect something is going on between them. Akane quickly denies it, claiming Sato was just stalking her. That night, Akane stays up late studying for an upcoming test. Sato, on the other hand, doesn't see the point in studying. He boasts that he never studies and just memorizes everything from class, even scoring perfectly on the last test. Akane takes this as mockery, throws her pillow at him, and tells him to leave. A few minutes later, Sato knocks on her door and hands her a snack. She takes it inside, wondering why he would go out of his way to make it for her. She decides to take one bite and is overwhelmed by how delicious it is. The next morning at school, Akane is walking through the halls when she suddenly collapses. Luckily, Himari is nearby and rushes to her side. Himari asks if she's okay and Akane reassures her that she's fine, just a bit sleep-deprived from studying all night. Himari urges her not to push herself too hard and reminds her that her health is more important. But Akane is more focused on getting the top grade in the class. Himari advises her again, pointing out that she'll never outscore Sato. Despite this, Akane remains determined to surpass Sato in every way. That evening, Sato brings her a late-night snack, only to find her slumped over her desk. Assuming she's fallen asleep, he moves closer, but notices her uncomfortable expression. He quickly realizes she isn't feeling well. Sato checks Akane's temperature and sees that it's a worrying 40 degrees. She's clearly burning up from a fever. As he tends to her, Akane mumbles weakly, talking about how much she needs to study if she ever wants to achieve her dream of becoming a doctor. She explains that her ultimate goal is to help people live long, healthy lives and to be someone who can step in whenever someone is in need. Akane's voice turns quieter as she shares how her parents can't afford to send her to medical school. She reveals that the only reason she agreed to marry Sato in the first place was because her grandmother promised to fund her education if she married him. Hearing this, Sato feels a mix of surprise and admiration. He never knew about this deeply personal dream of hers. A few minutes later, Sato checks her temperature again. This time it's climbed to 42 degrees. Alarmed, he decides it's time to call an ambulance, but Akane insists there's no need for that and tells him to just go to bed. He tries calling an ambulance anyway, but can't get through. Seeing no other option, he picks her up in his arms and tells her he won't just stand by while she's suffering. As he carries her outside, Akane looks at him with surprise. She never thought he had the strength to lift her so easily. She jokes about him being stronger than she thought he was. That aside, Sato decides to use this precious moment to bring up the dream she mentioned earlier. At first, she assumes he's about to roast her about it, but instead he tells her that he believes in her. He's confident she'll achieve her dream because she's someone who never gives up no matter how hard things get. The scene shifts to the following morning. Akane wakes Sato up by leaning over him with a playful smirk and a mock death threat. She quickly laughs it off, saying he should be grateful she woke him up in time for school. It turns out Akane only had a bad cold that day, and a week later, everything has returned to normal. At school, Sato's day starts with Himari approaching him to congratulate him on his perfect test score. Not long after, Akane walks up to him with a deadly serious look in her eyes. She reminds him that he has a wife and warns him not to get too close to other girls. Before class, Akane gives Sato the lunchbox she made for him, upset that he forgot it, thinking he dislikes her cooking. Sato reassures her he loves it, insisting it was an accident. At lunchtime, just as Sato is about to eat, his little sister, Shize, demands his entire lunch despite already eating 3 bowls of rice. The class, charmed by Shize, pressures Sato into sharing, so he lets her sit in his lap for a bite. Suddenly, Himari notices Sato and Akane's lunches are identical, teasing that they must be dating. Their overly quick denial sparks suspicion, but before Sato can explain, Shize devours his entire bento. With the evidence gone, the class loses interest, and Shize pretends it was all part of her plan, though she really just wanted the food. Later, in the hallway, Himari corners Sato about the lunch. He effortlessly lies, saying they coincidentally used the same ingredients. She then bluntly asks if he and Akane are dating. Sato denies it, and Himari, satisfied, apologizes for the odd question and leaves. That night, Akane is on edge, hearing noises. She turns to see a terrifying figure and screams, startling Sato. She claims to have seen a ghost, but Sato finds nothing. Too scared to sleep, she begs him to stay awake. Later, she hears more ghostly sounds and runs to Sato's study, but with no proof, he dismisses her fears. When Sato goes to the bathroom, Akane pleads to go with him, which he refuses. Then, she insists he sit outside while she bathes, too scared to be alone. The next day, Shize, loving pranks, decides to tease Akane by loudly declaring she's married to Sato. Before she can finish, Sato and Akane silence and abduct her, dragging her to an empty classroom. Furious, Akane reminds Sato she told him not to tell anyone about their marriage. In Sato's defense, he never actually told Shize about his marriage, she just figured it out, which makes sense since she's his little sister. Moving on, she brings up the ghost in Akane's house and dramatically claims it's real, warning that it will lower Akane's test scores if left unchecked. Sato knows Shize is just messing with Akane, but Akane fully believes her and begs her to exorcise the ghost. At their house, Shize insists she needs to go through all their belongings. She searches Sato's study, convinced he has naughty magazines, but instead, she finds a pair of his underwear. When she wants to check Akane's room next, Akane refuses after seeing what Shize did with Sato's underwear. They move to the bedroom, where Akane saw the ghost, and Shize finally confesses she was the ghost all along. She had keys from their grandpa and snuck in. With the mystery solved, she declares she's hungry and demands dinner. Akane refuses at first, but after some strategic flattery, she ends up making Shize a lavish meal. During dinner, Sato casually picks food off Shize's cheek, making Akane notice how unusually close they are. Later that night, Akane checks on Shize, relieved to find her still playing games. She takes the opportunity to talk privately with Sato, first bringing up the cat game he played with Shize. She's frustrated because she would have played it with him if she'd known he wanted to. Sato is confused, but Akane just gets embarrassed and calls him dumb. Then, she brings up how much he pampers Shize. Sato sees nothing wrong with it after all, they're blood-related, only for Shize to pop out from under the covers. She announces she'll sleep in their bed as usual, leaving Akane in disbelief. Akane insists she only sleeps with Sato because their grandparents forced her, but Shize assumes she just wants alone time with him and offers to sleep on the floor. Not wanting any misunderstandings, Akane says they should all sleep together. Later, Shize turns to Akane and tells her she needs to be more direct about her feelings for Sato. Akane tries to act oblivious, but Shize easily sees through her jealousy over Sato pampering her. While Sato is too dense to notice, Shize reassures Akane that she's glad Sato has someone like her around, as she once worried he might end up alone. When Akane presses for clarification, Shize simply goes to sleep. Later, Akane meets Himari at a cafe, where Himari bluntly asks if she likes Sato. Caught off guard, Akane frantically denies it but questions why Himari is asking. Himari admits she has a crush on Sato, admiring his looks, preparedness, and reliability like the time he calmly handled a teammate's heat stroke while everyone else panicked. Akane concedes that Sato is dependable, but doesn't understand what Himari sees in him. Himari hopes Akane can help her get closer to Sato, requesting information about his interests. Akane realizes she doesn't actually know much about him. That evening, Sato catches Akane trailing him with a notepad. She refuses to explain, even as she holds a camera up to his face during dinner. When she suddenly asks about his type, Sato, surprised, says he doesn't have one. She then asks his favorite foods, and he lists steak, sushi, and seafood bowls with caviar, though the last one seems too fancy. When she asks how he likes his steak, he says rare. The next morning, Akane shares Sato's food preferences with Himari, and, after some thought, adds that he enjoys video games and reading before bed. Himari, intrigued, asks how Akane knows that, forcing Akane to make up an excuse. That night, while preparing dinner, Sato assumes Akane will make steak since she asked about it. Though she had no intention of doing so, his excitement convinces her to cook it. On their way back from grocery shopping, Akane reminisces about shopping with her mother as a child, though Sato can't relate. At home, Sato is shocked by how good her steak is, declaring he could eat it every day. Embarrassed but pleased, Akane promises to make him amazing food anytime. However, when she leans in too close, both get flustered. The next day, Himari approaches Sato, asking about his type again. When he questions where she heard he didn't have one, she dodges. Sato explains he doesn't categorize people that way, he'd need to get to know someone first. Himari is even more smitten, as most guys only notice her looks. Sato sympathizes, acknowledging how frustrating that must be, but Himari is thrilled he called her pretty. Feeling bold, Himari whispers in his ear, asking if he could ever fall for someone like her. Caught off guard, Sato asks if she's serious, but flustered, Himari calls it a joke and dashes away. That evening, Akane sneaks into Sato's room to gather intel for Himari, but is caught red-handed just as she finds his diary. She defensively insists she's not spying for anyone, though Sato never accused her of it. Instead, she asks for a book recommendation, and Sato hands her a dense historical war book, saying he enjoys laughing at humanity's stupidity. Akane doesn't get the appeal but shares the info with Himari, who later complains that she couldn't understand a word of it. Akane apologizes, but Himari is actually happy now she has an excuse to ask Sato for help. She eagerly approaches him, asking for an explanation. Watching from a distance, Akane feels a twinge of jealousy over how naturally Himari interacts with him. Sato agrees to help Himari, noting that he owes her since she always mediated his fights with Akane. Himari insists she just doesn't like seeing people argue, but Sato swears Akane might have killed him if not for her intervention. Surprised, Sato learns that back in grade school, Akane defended Himari from bullies. Though she's now outgoing, Himari admits she was once socially awkward and teased for her appearance. Sato compliments her blonde hair, saying anyone who mocked it was stuck up. Himari laughs, revealing that Akane had said the exact same thing back then, cementing their friendship. Akane is touched by her friend's concern, but is caught off guard when Shize bluntly asks if she's jealous of Himari's crush on Sato. Akane denies it, claiming surprise, but Shize points out that Himari has liked Sato since their first year, and that they would make a perfect couple. Seeing Akane's discomfort, Shize presses further, asking if she secretly hopes they don't date. Akane has no answer. After school, Himari excitedly thanks Akane for helping her talk to Sato and invites her for a strawberry parfait and a sleepover. Akane is thrilled but panics she can't let Himari find out she lives with Sato. She tries to make excuses, but Himari, recalling Shai's recent visit, assumes Akane doesn't want to hang out with her. To reassure her, Akane reluctantly agrees. She rushes home to warn Sato, telling him to hide before Himari arrives. However, there's no time, so Sato quickly hides behind the counter. As Himari and Akane chat, Himari reveals she plans to ask Sato out but wants Akane's blessing. She knows Akane has always been fixated on Sato, even if she denies it. Akane insists she hates him, giving Himari the green light. Sato, overhearing everything, feels disheartened. The next day, Himari asks Sato out in an empty classroom, while Akane and Shais listen outside. Later, Sato tells Akane about the date, curious about her feelings since they're technically married. Akane angrily declares their marriage fake and claims she doesn't care. Sato accepts her words, but Akane instantly regrets them. The next morning, as Sato prepares to leave, Akane grows uneasy and finally stops him, admitting she doesn't want him to go. She can't explain why, but the thought of him with someone else makes her sad. Despite the forced marriage, she won't let him cheat on her. Sato, pleased, reveals he turned Himari down from the start and only faked the date to gauge Akane's feelings. Since he's already dressed, he invites her out to make up for the prank. The next day at school, Himari greets Sato normally. Though rejected, she vows to keep trying. But now that Akane has acknowledged her feelings, she won't let Himari steal him away. Himari wasn't joking when she said she wasn't giving up on Sato, because the very next day she gives him a homemade lunch at school. She heard that Sato really likes steak, so that's what she made for him. However, Sato declines because he already brought his own lunch. She still insists that he at least try some of the lunch she made because she worked really hard on it and the rest of Sato's classmates end up pressuring him into it. So Sato says he will take a bite. Himari is happy that Sato agreed to eat her lunch, so she feeds him a piece. After taking the first bite, Sato realizes that the steak she made is actually delicious, so he continues eating it. Akane gets upset that Sato is enjoying Himari's food so much, and even though Himari doesn't understand why Akane would be jealous, she tries to make her feel better by feeding her as well, and Akane gets embarrassed. Later on in the day, Himari approaches Sato again and tells him she has been having a hard time with math class recently, so she was hoping he would tutor her. Sato doesn't see a reason, so he agrees to help her study. But then Himari suggests that the two of them can study at her place and her parents won't be home, so it will just be the two of them. Sato tells her to quit joking around since that sounds a lot like a date to him. But that's exactly what Himari was going for after all. She made it very clear that she was going to keep flirting with Sato until he falls in love with her. However, Akane won't stand for this. She could let Himari feeding Sato slide. But there's no way she's letting Sato spend that much alone time at Himari's place. Akane is now even more against letting Himari have alone time with Sato, so as a compromise, Himari suggests that Akane joins the tutoring session as well. After all, if the two smartest people in class tutor her, then she might be able to get third place on the next exam. Shizu suddenly materializes after hearing someone threaten her spot on the class rankings. And since Shizu is the third smartest person in class, Himari suggests that all four of them should have a study session together, and they might as well have it at Akane's house, since there's a lot of them now. Akane once again erases all evidence that Sato lies in the house as well, and once they all get seated, Sato asks Himari what part of the math course she doesn't understand, but Himari says she doesn't understand any of it. Sato rephrases the question and asks her when she first started struggling to understand math class, but it's all been kind of fuzzy for her ever since they started adding letters in math. Akane points out that Himari's grades first started dropping during their first year of high school, and since Sato finally knows where to start, he begins tutoring her, and after a few minutes, Himari is able to solve the math problems on her own. Himari tells Sato he is really good at teaching and asks him to continue, but she gets really close to his face. So Sato tells her to back away because it's embarrassing to be this close, and it's making Akane really mad. The next moment, Shizy clings onto Sato and says she is bored, so Sato suggests they all take a break and play a game or something. But instead of just picking something like Mario Kart, Akane pulls out a card memory game, intent on proving that she is smarter than Sato. But in the end, Sato absolutely demolishes all of them because his memory is really good. He doesn't want to keep playing, so he tells them they can continue without him because he's going out to get some snacks. But while he's out, Akane catches up to him because she can tell Sato is feeling a little down. She starts a conversation by saying she had no idea his memory was so good. But Sato doesn't like to bring it up because people constantly call him creepy for it, making people think he is a stalker or something. She tells Sato that his memory isn't creepy at all, and in fact, she would love to have an ability like that since she wouldn't have to study so much. The two eventually return home after buying the snacks, but to their horror, when they get back, they find Himari and Shizy playing video games on Sato's console. So Akane has to make up an excuse for why it's there, and Sato asks Akane why she didn't hide away earlier. Anyway, they all sit down to have some snacks, and Himari thanks Sato for his help since she feels like she understands math a lot better now. Sato says tutoring her was fun for him since Himari catches on quickly, so he'd be happy to help if she ever needs tutoring in the future. Himari is happy to hear that because she was actually hoping she could have another study session with him, and maybe next time they could do it at his house instead. Sato chokes up at this a little since this is technically his house, so he tells her she can't come over. Himari thinks it's cute how flustered Sato is, so she tries getting closer to him, but in the process, she accidentally knocks over her cup of tea and stains her shirt. Sato instinctively runs over to the drawers to get a towel for Himari to dry her shirt, and Himari is grateful, but she asks how Sato knew where the towels were. Sato tries explaining it away by saying he just guessed, and Himari doesn't question it since Sato is really smart. Anyway, she needs to go take care of the stain on her shirt, so Shizy leads her to the bathroom, and while she's gone, Akane gets upset with Sato and tells him this is all his fault for agreeing to tutor Himari. Sato says there's nothing wrong with helping a friend study, but Akane is jealous because Sato has never offered to help her study before. However, that's straight up false because Sato clearly remembers trying to help Akane study once and she yelled at him for it. Akane says she only did that because she was too ashamed to accept help from her arch nemesis. Just then, the lights in the house go out and Akane is deathly scared of the dark, so she clings onto Sato. He tells her it's just a power outage, so he wants to go check the breaker box, but Akane doesn't want to be left alone. She suddenly apologizes for being so stubborn all the time, but Sato tells her she's fine the way she is. Sure, she can be a bit annoying at times and has trouble expressing herself, but overall, he is starting to understand that she doesn't mean any harm by it, so he doesn't mind if she acts a little selfish on occasion. Just then, the lights come back on and Himari and Shizu come back into the living room, but Himari spots Akane holding on to Sato, and she thinks it's nice that the two of them are getting along. The next day, Sato is talking to Shizu at school because he couldn't figure out what caused the power outage yesterday. So he asks her if she had anything to do with it, but Shizu's hands are clean. Just then, Himari comes up to Sato and asks him if he can tutor her again today, and Sato agrees, so Himari invites Akane as well. However, Akane says she doesn't want to join this time because she has nothing to learn from someone like Sato. But after Himari leaves, she goes up to Sato and asks him to please help her study when they get home. That night, Sato teaches Akane a good method to memorize things, and it works really well for her, so she thanks him for sharing his study methods. But this isn't really Sato's method in the first place. He has never had to study, but he came up with a couple study methods as an experiment and tried them out with different people to see how it would work. Although Akane is the first one to memorize things so easily with it, so it must be because she's naturally smart. With that said, Sato thinks they've studied enough for one night, so he wants to call it a day, but Akane wants to keep studying till morning. Sato knows she is studying to become a doctor, but he still doesn't understand why becoming a doctor is so important to her. She tells him it's none of his business and Sato admits that she's right, but he still wants to know about Akane's motivations regardless. Since Sato wants to know more about her, Akane agrees to tell him and begins explaining that she had a little sister who was very sick. Her sister could hardly get out of bed, and Akane's parents had to work day in and day out to cover her hospital bills, so they were never around much. Akane's sister would constantly cry out in pain, but all Akane could do was pat her head and watch her suffer until the day she eventually died. She couldn't save her sister back then, but there are other people out there just like her who are suffering right now, so Akane wants to do everything she can to save those people. Sato is glad Akane opened up to him, but since she told him about her late sister, she's been feeling gloomy ever since. Sato doesn't know what to do about it, so he goes to Shizu to ask her for advice on the matter. After telling Shizu about the situation, she thinks about it for a second and tells him that Akane would probably feel better if she got to do something fun with Sato, like shopping. Sato says he goes shopping with Akane all the time. That's not the kind of shopping Shizu was talking about. Even though Akane probably won't admit it, Shizu figured out that she's into a lot of girly stuff, so inviting her to go shopping for sweets or something stylish would be more appropriate. That same day, Sato goes up to Akane while she's making dinner and asks her if she wants to go out with him on their next day off. Akane is so shocked that she accidentally burns the food, but she agrees to the date with Sato, and the next day, she goes to talk to her grandma about it. Her grandma is so excited that Sato and Akane are finally getting along that she could die with no regrets right now, but before that, she has to prepare Akane for the date. So she brings her to a hidden closet full of clothes she had been gathering for the day Akane falls in love. But Akane denies being in love with Sato. The day of the date finally arrives, and when Sato sees Akane, he is stunned for a moment because she looks really lovely in that dress. They head out into town and Sato suggests that they go to a cat cafe first since he knows how much Akane loves kitties, but Akane immediately says they can't go there. She's come here before, and let's just say she went a little overboard, so she's banned from that cafe for life, but she still really wants to go in. Sato takes Akane to a karaoke room. Akane picks out a song for them to sing, and they actually have a lot of fun singing together, and afterwards, Sato takes her to a lemonade store that he thinks she'll like. Akane gets a strawberry lemonade and Sato was right because she really does love it. She has had a lot of fun today, but she's curious why Sato asked her out in the first place since he always does things for a reason. Sato admits that he was trying to make her feel better because he made her remember some painful memories, and Akane is surprised since that was awfully considerate of him. In return, she says Sato can pick a place he wants to go to next, and she'll tag along with him. But she soon regrets those words because Sato takes her to a supplement store. As soon as they walk in, a big buff dude offers Sato a platter of supplements, and he immediately starts scarfing down as many as he can, and he looks like he's really enjoying himself. He and Akane start walking home, but along the way, Akane spots a ring that she really likes in one of the shops. Sato tells her she should get it for herself if she really likes it that much, and Akane wants to, but it's too expensive for her to afford. Sato takes a look at the price, and it really is expensive. But Akane says she'll just have to wait until she starts working, and can afford to buy it for herself. Although by then someone else would probably have bought the ring. They continue walking home, and Akane thanks Sato for asking her out today because she really does feel a lot better. Akane's cheerful mood quickly fades, and by the next day, she's back to complaining about every little thing. Sato wishes they could get along for more than a day, but then he recalls that Akane really wanted the ring she saw yesterday, sparking an idea. At school, Sato asks Shy if he can come over to her house. She inquires if there's a special reason, but Sato insists he just wants to hang out since they haven't spent much time together recently. Shai agrees and calls for her ride. Moments later, her limo arrives. Sato, recalling past harrowing rides, asks the driver, Ru, to drive carefully, but she only knows how to go fast or faster. After a heart-pounding journey, they arrive at Shai's mansion and head to her room. Once dressed, Shai asks what game he'd like to play. Without a specific idea, Sato lets Shai choose, and she suggests they play Vampires, a game where she tries to climb on top of him and suck him dry. In the midst of their game, Sato's aunt walks in. She adores Sato as much as Shai does and invites him to dinner and to spend the night. However, Sato declines, stating he needs to get home as Akane will be waiting for him. Before leaving, he asks his aunt if he could help at her company, seeking a part-time job. She's puzzled, suggesting he could ask his grandfather for money, but Sato wants to earn it himself. Upon learning he's planning to buy a gift, both Shai and her mother realize who it's for. Shai feels hurt, thinking Sato used spending time with her as a pretext to talk to her mother. Sato assures her he genuinely wanted to spend time with her. Despite her reservations about Sato's arranged marriage, his aunt offers him a task. The localization department needs help translating software written in an obscure language. Confidently, Sato claims he can master it in one night. That evening, Sato immerses himself in learning the language, rapidly flipping through pages to memorize the code. Akane bursts in, surprised to see him studying. Sato explains he's learning a language and, after a few more minutes, declares he's done and just needs a good night's sleep to retain the information. Akane, impressed, wishes she had Sato's brain. When she asks why he's learning a new language, Sato deflects, saying it's none of her business. The next day, Sato leaves school with Shai and heads to her house to begin working. Sato asks if she's upset about him wanting to buy a present for Akane. Shai clarifies that she understands the gift is to improve his relationship with Akane, but she feels lonely since they haven't spent much time together since his marriage. Sato apologizes, and Shai requests that he stay with her until she falls asleep. Later that night, Sato returns home to find Akane waiting. She asks where he's been, and he replies it's none of her business, heading to bed. As he passes, Akane notices a familiar scent on him and decides to consult her grandmother the next day. She expresses concern about Sato's late nights and absence during dinners. Her grandmother suggests that, given Sato's attractiveness, he might be popular with other girls. Akane admits there's one girl who likes Sato, but they're just friends. Her grandmother advises her to be honest with herself, as life is too short for self-deception. The following day at school, Himari comes to Akane, upset after being rejected by Sato again. Akane comforts her, but when Shai walks by, Akane notices she has the same scent she detected on Sato the previous night. That evening, Sato is out late again, leaving Akane to dine alone. She tries to convince herself she doesn't care, but recalling her grandmother's words, she admits she misses him. She attempts to call him, only to realize she doesn't have his contact information. Resourcefully, she looks up Akane's house number and calls. A maid answers, confirming Sato is there, but then Shai's mother takes over. Caught off guard, Akane stammers, but Shai's mother informs her that Sato is busy with work and can't be disturbed. She dismisses their marriage as a sham and questions why Akane is so concerned about Sato's activities before hanging up. Late that evening, Sato wraps up his work and meets with Shai's mother, Ryuko. She's already received the translation from Sato and, trusting his impeccable work, hands him his payment without the usual cross-check. Before he leaves, Ryuko inquires why Sato didn't inform Akane about his job there. He wanted it to be a surprise. With his task complete, Ru gives Sato a ride to the jewelry store so he can purchase a ring. Upon returning home, Sato faces an irate Akane. She's upset about his frequent visits to Shai's house and suggests he should have married Shai instead. Sato clarifies that while he and Shai are close, they're not romantically involved. Akane, still fuming, is about to storm off when Sato stops her and presents the ring he bought. Akane recognizes it as the one she admired in the jewelry store days earlier. Sato explains he took on translation work for Ryuko to afford the ring, which is why he was out late. Flustered, Akane hears Sato express his hope that they can get along better. Overwhelmed, she runs out of the room but soon returns to thank him, appreciating the gesture. The next morning, Sato finds Akane in bed, admiring the ring with a joyful expression. She asks if he'll be out late again, but Sato assures her his work is done. Elated, Akane plans to cook him a special dinner. Throughout the day, she can't help but admire the ring, and by dinner, she's prepared an extravagant steak meal Sato's favorite. Despite the overwhelming portions, Sato eats every bite, not wanting to reject her kindness. The following day, as they walk to class, Sato feels the effects of the heavy meal, but notices Akane still wearing her ring. He discreetly pulls her aside, pointing out that their classmates might notice and ask questions. Understanding, Akane agrees to wear the ring only at home. However, upon returning home, she realizes with horror that the ring is missing. Panicked, Akane retraces her steps, searching everywhere but to no avail. The next day, Akane searches the grocery store, hoping to find the ring, but has no luck. She sits on a park bench, tears welling up, when Shai approaches. Realizing Akane's distress, Shai offers to help find the ring. Together, they scour the school, but by nightfall, they're empty-handed. Akane apologizes for keeping Shai out late and insists on continuing the search alone, feeling responsible for the loss. Shai suggests asking Sato for help, given his photographic memory, but Akane refuses, not wanting him to know. Meanwhile, Sato wonders why Akane is out so late. Just then, Shai arrives, mentioning Akane won't be back for a while, but refrains from explaining, honoring a promise to Akane. Taking Shai's hint, Sato decides to discreetly follow Akane the next day. He observes her searching various places and realizes she hasn't been wearing the ring. Finding her crying under a bridge, Sato approaches, assuring her they can get another ring, and she shouldn't stress. However, Akane insists the ring was special, a symbol of Sato's voluntary affection, unlike their arranged marriage. Moved, Sato offers to help find it. Recalling their path the day the ring was lost, Sato remembers Akane opening her bag multiple times. He deduces she might have dropped it near a storm drain where she took out her handkerchief. Removing the drain cover, Sato retrieves the pouch containing the ring. Overjoyed, Akane hugs him, vowing never to lose it again. Meanwhile, a new girl connected to the Hojo family arrives in Japan, displeased with Sato's marriage and plotting to win him over.